Day and good evening. Welcome to another episode of Crypto with English. I think one of the burning questions nowadays is where can one find a one stop shop for all of your needs when creating a blockchain project these days? In many ways, it's almost hard to find specialists, as they would say. So, I'd like to introduce a returning guest and good friend of mine, Prashant Gami. He is the founder and CEO of xenabler, based out of Australia. And today we're going to deep dive into what his company does and how they take clients through the blockchain project, creation process. Whether it's for an MVP or something in more advanced stages as far as a product or a service. So, Prashant, thank you for coming back on.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for inviting me again, and good to be here.
Yes. So, what have you been up to since you've last been on the show?
There has been a lot of shifts. We grew our team size. Obviously, we had a lot more engineers, so we are now around 75 people as of last month, and it's just growing. So it's just massive growth since we last spoke, and we are dabbling more into blockchain, Web3, and all that. I was actually in US for a while. Sorry, I couldn't catch up with you in person, but hopefully
No
next time
worries.
when I'm around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
So yeah, the company is growing, and we are growing in terms of the services maturity, and you know how new solutions are coming every day. So it's just an exciting world.
Sure. And that is definitely some excellent growth to say the least. And as
Mm.
far as, blockchain platforms, programming languages, can you discuss some of that? What are some of the projects, some of the specializations you have at Xenabler now?
So we are currently focusing more on the smart contract side, whether it is
Okay.
like Ethereum, Hyperledger, private blockchain, public blockchain, Binance, any Solana. So we have Solidity Rust developers, we
Sure.
have traditional SaaS developers and mobile apps developer. So we cover end-to-end development, and more than just the development. When you come to blockchain or any new technology project, it's more important whether to build it and how to build it. So it's
Right.
not just about coding, but deciding, like, okay, how the project will work, how the product will work, how the technology
Right.
needs to fit with that. Also the things like white papers, tokenomics, those are equally important part before you get to actually code the smart contract. And that's where we try to focus end to end, that it is not just a coding shop, but more about getting from idea to app store all the way, and from the technical perspective. So we've been focusing more on smart contracts and the real life utility world so far, and now we are slowly expanding into Web3, metaverse, and those parts.
Got it.
Yeah.
And as far as the metaverse, and I think it's hard to not come across a blockchain related article these days without hearing about, metaverse and AR and VR type projects.
Yes.
What are you and your team doing in that space?
We are currently focusing on the smart contract side, because that's where our capabilities are, and we are trying to onboard few Unreal and Unity developers to get onto the gaming side of the metaverse. But our
Right.
focus is more on the business model, the technology, smart contracts, and the tokenomics, and how people can actually utilize metaverse to earn and play and earn, or like participate and earn, or whatever all these earning model that are coming through.
Right.
So we help that. Also, the smart contract that goes into DAO, and defining the rules of how distributed organization can work as well, in those spaces.
Right.
Yeah.
So, if we're to start from, I guess from the beginning here, as far as this
Mhm.
process overall. So, if you have a startup, and let's say they come to you and your team, they want to build a project. Let's say they have a good idea, but they don't have anything yet. So, there's no MVP, there's no white paper, there's really just the bare idea. Where would you say, or how would you instruct a team like that as far as where to start, so to say? So let's
So
say, yes, please.
sorry. So there are a number of companies that come through. One is, obviously, there are new startups who understand the ecosystem, and they already have some idea in their mind what they are trying to do, whether they want to set
Yes.
up a DAO, or they want to do an NFT marketplace, or they are trying to set up a metaverse. They have a very clear understanding how those uh, entities work and how the business model around that will work. And in that case, our job then becomes is uh, literally listening to those ideas, documenting them, and understanding how to, complement that with the technology.
Right.
So whether they need to be on one particular metaverse or general purpose and go on multiple metaverses, how that will scale, what is the starting point, what the first version will look like, and that might not be the pie in the sky version, but something you can roll
Sure.
out in next 3 to 6 months. Can you utilize any of the existing solution and get there faster, which is equally important. You shouldn't be building just because you want to build. You need to
Sure.
decide that, okay, what can get you to the market faster, and then decide, okay, so now what part I can now build and replace from what I got off the shelf. So that gives you a lot of learning into user behavior, early market access, and so on. So we help them look at the existing solutions in the market. We help them understand the technical aspect of that. What is the scope? What scope can be cut down? How it can be built in a way that it can be scaled later rather than throwing away and starting again, which is very important. And then taking it from there all the way to launch and then subsequent innovation.
Got it. So, if a team goes up to you and they have a good idea, would it be fair to say you would advise them to, let's say, if a project is better suited for being built on a cloud, for instance,
Yes,
than blockchain, because blockchain is very energy and electricity intensive,
yes,
that would be essentially the recommendation you would make, like as far as like
yeah,
guiding that team as far as
yeah.
how
So
how they're going to build that.
yeah, so think about, like, a lot of people confuse that because you are doing blockchain, everything has to be on blockchain. While in
Right.
reality, what happens is that blockchain is your ledger, does not mean your data need to sit on that ledger. So there are a lot of successful projects and applications where it's a zero knowledge proof. That means the
Right.
proof exists, but it does not have to have any knowledge about like the existing system and the other database where the actual data sits. It's the hash that is stored as a proof in the ledger. So later on, if you want to check if the data was, not altered or anything, you can still go and check against the hash. But it does not mean your large data or blob needs to sit on the blockchain, because that will be very costly.
Right.
So things like that. Also things like, for example, if they have done the designing and everything, if they have done, some idea of this, what they are trying to create, understanding that, okay, is that the best way of doing that, is that going to
Right.
scale up, because there are a lot of shortcomings in technology that they might not have seen yet,
Sure.
from the perspective. So advising them in that regard. So we go through discovery, what we call discovery workshop of couple of days, brainstorming with the business, trying to grasp the idea from their point of view, because they have been thinking about it a lot longer than what we have come across. So it's very important to listen rather than just, go and say something. So we try to absorb as much information as we can. Then we go out, do some of our homework from the technical perspective. We come
Sure.
back for another round, and then we discuss it more and say, okay, this is what we think. This is our recommendation. What do you think? And that goes through feasibility. We do a couple of POC prototyping, and then it goes into development.
Got it. And then that makes that makes perfect sense as well. So, I guess as a baseline, whether somebody's creating a crypto token, whether somebody's creating a decentralized app, you need to have a white paper. So,
Yes,
when it comes to white papers, how would you instruct teams and, future clients as far as where to start on this? Because I think at the very least the white paper, it's like a preamble. It's almost like an appetizer, so to say,
yes.
it's for people introducing their projects to the world. So,
Yes.
tell me about some of that process and what do you
So
generally recommend?
So white paper has two components. One is the technology component, which is basically saying whether it can be built, how, what are the structures going to be, what are the
Right,
token, whether it's going to be ERC20 token versus 721, which is the new token, and like basically what are the technical bits that are required. But the other
right,
important part is the characteristic and what is the value for the stakeholders. Because if you are investing in a particular coin or particular project or NFT or whatever it may be, you need to understand the value proposition there. So it's equally financial as much as it is technical. So in a business, obviously.
Sure.
So who are your stakeholders? What is value to them for that particular token? Why would they pursue it? What are the benefits? And how you are structuring that system so that the transparency is evident before they even buy the token. So because everybody comes to blockchain for one and one reason: transparency and
Right.
trust. If you cannot establish trust with your tokenomics or white paper, then I guess the business case is not there, and that's bound to fail. Because when people will look at it, it's like there is something fishy going on here. There's so many loopholes, or this doesn't make sense, or what happens when something like when people try to trick the system, which people always
Sure.
do. So those things you need to think about, like whether your business model, yes, you have a best intent in heart, but is it actually translated into that white paper and the smart contract eventually?
Right, and that and that definitely makes perfect sense as well. And some white papers, they're intuitive, and I think at times you can kind of tell that they're good. And I've also seen very atrocious white papers out there, as well. There's like scarce data or information on tokenomics, as you've mentioned. The founding team. I've seen white papers where nobody has a background in programming or anything related like that. So those are kind of like red flags to me as well. Especially I think from a mathematical point of view, if tokenomics can't be easily kind of explained or expressed, that for me would make me scratch my head, so to say. And
Yes.
sometimes I see situations where people will put in too much information, and I kind of wonder sometimes, is like, okay, are you trying to distract from kind of maybe the main point here that maybe somebody else might ordinarily realize? I guess I don't know if it's like a white paper gaslighting or something like that,
Yes.
but
True.
I've seen some projects where they try to package themselves as really great with numbers and I guess you could say explanations of things, and then it's kind of like you go deeper. It's kind of like more flash and not so much substance as
Substance.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to say the least.
And the other thing that you see commonly in the industry nowadays, because of shortage of talent, is that a lot of thing is being built in a very crude way. So
Right,
think about this, like part of my job is basically not only to explain client, but to hire right developers as well.
right,
And I'm coming across developers who have very little programming experience and has done like 10 different smart contracts already, which is great.
sure,
I'm not saying that it is not. Like
sure.
they have gone out and do stuff, but then I asked them, like, okay, so who audited your white paper? Like you did the smart contract, was it audited by someone to make sure, like,
That's a
the
good point.
leak
Right.
proof or
Yeah.
everything? And they're like, no, 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 this, like, I just coded it. And I'm like, it's just university student coding the, like,
Right.
smart contracts that are not audited and they're out there in the production,
Right.
is a very very high risk item, because people are putting money in this project and not just small amount. So if
Right.
things are not done properly, then we hear all these scams and, like, crypto, in the crypto world, that okay, people are losing their money, but then at the very base of it, there's a loose structure that they are built upon. And that is
Right.
obviously something you need to look for, like as you mentioned, team, their background, what is their understanding. If they do not have the understanding themselves, did they consult anyone?
Right.
Did they have the right team around them to guide them about the financial, about the business model, and the technological aspect of them? Otherwise, you are basically exposing yourself,
Sure.
as a result, into those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and just to backtrack a little, just to clarify, not necessarily saying that the founding team necessarily has to have a
Yeah.
programmer per se, but I think you need to have people with some type of sophisticated, specialized knowledge in something
Yes.
going
Yeah.
into this versus, let's say, five people who really like NFTs and there's, not a whole lot else there.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, look, we all can't be expert in all the fields, but we can always go and seek the expertise and build
Right.
on top of that. It's like in your legal profession, you know that, like, people come to you, they are not they don't have to be lawyers, they just need to know the right lawyers. That's all it is about.
Right. Yeah, and that certainly helps a lot, as well. And speaking of programmers, what do you look for when you're bringing on a programmer onto your team? Like, are you looking for, full stack? Are you looking at people with just, let's say, a Solidity, smart contracts, and Rust background? What's kind of, I think, the bare requirement to, let's say, be
So,
considered onto
given
your team?
that we are end-to-end team and much more comprehensive, we go from, like, from Solidity developers, Rust developers, from mobile app developers, from web developers, front end, back end, full stack, all of that. But at the heart of it, in whatever domain they are, they need
Right.
to be clear about, like, their particular domain. But when they come to me for the second and the final round, I look for two main qualities. One, if they are active learners, because we are in innovation business, and if you are not learning, you're literally like gonna rust in 6 months, and then you are of no
Right.
use, and then you are suffocating in this place. So for me, it is very important that I can identify a person is an active learner, and that means he or she, they're learning the things that they do not have to. They're learning out of passion, they're learning out of interest, not because of necessity. And
Right.
that's a very, very fine line between them. That you are learning because you had to versus you are learning because you want to. And I do the interview around that. The second thing that I always need to look is whatever they are, like, depending on their seniority level. So
Sure.
when you look at junior or mid-level developers, you're looking at, can they understand the instructions given to them and follow them in the way. When you
Sure.
look at seniors, can they generate the instruction? Can they explain why certain thing has to be done in a certain way? If they
Right.
can't do that, doesn't matter how much experience they have, they are still mid-level developers, because they still need someone to tell them why things has to be in certain way.
Right.
So that's my role as an employer, or as a hiring manager, or whatever you want to call it. But to identify people with those two strong attributes, whether they are clear on why certain things need to be coded in certain way for the scaling purpose, for the
Sure.
benefit of the product, and a long-term vision, obviously, and the stability. And the other thing is if they are active learner, because what they know right now is good for now, but in 6 months time they have to go and learn new things to be still be relevant.
Right. And speaking of which, so when it comes to developers and it comes to projects, I caught something in the newspaper. Melbourne, in particular, is becoming the tech center of Australia. So, can you talk a little bit about what it's like down there? In Melbourne, the energy, the projects, the people. Talk about that a little bit.
So in Australia, you see, like, a lot of communities are there in Melbourne, and it is becoming an epicenter of, like, blockchain policies, blockchain governance, blockchain initiatives, and all that. Sydney obviously is still big, and they both play the epicenter role in their own way. Somehow the community and those engagements are, like, much more distributed than it usually were in the previous one. So the tech
Sure.
hub and everything, now they are more shifted around, like, the different cities. So it is catching up. And the other thing is, I think, although same with any other governments, the regulations are still coming through as they
Sure.
always are, but at least there is a conversation around it. Like, I have been to a number of conferences in Australia last year and this year, and at least the regulators and everyone is turning their head in saying, we need to address this, how we can address this, the policies being made, defined, revised, challenged, and all that conversation is happening. And I think that is very, very important for anything like this, to prevent I wouldn't say prevent, but reduce the volatility that we are seeing in the market and technology.
Right.
The other important thing that I'm seeing, and I'm really fan of, that is real world utility.
Sure.
So as you know, blockchain goes much, much bigger than just crypto and NFT, and NFT goes much bigger than just the JPEG. and
Right.
and a lot of people, I think, now that we are in the bear market, people are talking about sustainability, long term effects, how this thing can actually add value to the world, to the business, to the technology world, and everything. And those are the conversations where you have some real long-term innovations happening. And I think it's an exciting period in that regards.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as that, are there any upcoming conferences that you and your team will be at? I know there's stuff going on in Sydney and Dubai and London.
Yeah,
It seems
yes,
like a pretty active year for a lot of those type of
I
events.
know.
To say the least.
It's all the events are back in person, so people are making. So
Yes,
I'm attending Australian crypto convention in Gold Coast in September, while my business partner Belinda, she's actually going to London in September. So she's
very
attending a
nice.
couple of events in London and Amsterdam during September, and then in October, actually, we are hosting. There's a group called SIPBN, which is here in Sydney, and I'm part of that group. So we are hosting conference, investor conference around blockchain, Web3, and technology in October, 18th of October, here in Sydney in ICC.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds
Yep.
like you guys are really, getting some of that increased visibility, out there, which is very, very important in this day and age. In particular, Web3 and blockchain, you need to have some sort of social media, some sort of community presence out there, which I think is
Yes.
almost novel in this day and age compared to like Web 2 and Web 1 and so on.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm still in my developer cell. I still like, my hands on computer and my head
Yeah,
down rather than talking to people much. But then there are days like, you feel energetic, but I'm still learning that, to be honest, like being out there and speaking about things rather than doing things. I'm still getting used to it.
right. And a question related to that, despite you could say the volatility in the crypto
Hmm.
markets, these
Yep.
past few months, it seems like the interest in DApp and NFT projects hasn't decreased. Many companies are still pursuing various projects in different capacities on the blockchain.
Yep.
Why do you think that is?
So, like I said, I don't think the interest has decreased.
Right.
Obviously the market cap has decreased, and my personal view to that is we are at the end of the hype period. So there was technology which
Good
was at
point.
a research stage, then it was at a hype stage where everybody just jumped in and like put money everywhere, and it was a like a bull market where everybody was like, "What can I make in next 3 months, 6 months?" and like so on. And now it is like basically that hype has started dying, and but the real world utility has just started. The expansion, if you think about like all the summits, international summits and everything in politics as well, they're talking about what do we do about crypto regulation. We need to
Right.
regulate that, we need to talk about that. Those conversations were in denial. If you go even like a year or two ago, they were like, no, 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 it's
Sure.
just the hype. At least they are turning to the real world utility, to the crypto and regulations and how that can become a mainstream and so on. So I think the interest has actually increased, although the market cap has decreased. And now we will see some like meaningful and like mainstream innovation coming through this period, which will go and sustain longer.
Right. And speaking of hype, and I've asked this question to, I guess you could say a few thought leaders in this community
Hmm.
already. Some former guests and some future guests I've discussed this with as well. But NFT art, do you think that is a bubble? Whether it's a partial bubble or a complete bubble, there is kind of, some whispers and some kind of pondering about that. Like for instance, you can have like a Bored Ape yacht club project, for instance,
Hmm.
and there's going to be like
Yeah.
10 copycats
Yes.
after that. So I
Hmm.
keep speaking with various thought leaders, and one of the concerns is that there is some sort of bubble that has developed, or is developing, that may end up kind of popping rather, or crashing at some point. What do you think about that?
Like I'm like coming from a very traditional like farmers family, I would say, and I still get attached to real things. So I think the NFT art has a place in the market, but not all the projects are really realizing that value. Like projects are
Right.
not about the art. Art is just a representation or a trophy of that project. Now, if you do not have a real project behind it that is actually fueling those growth or fueling that, like, market or cap or anything, then you are just investing into something that doesn't have any substance.
Sure.
And if you are not doing those research, that why that particular project exists and is there a value into it,
Right.
then obviously you're bound to lose your money, or, like, things are about to pop. And there's it's just a time rather than if question. So
Right.
yes, there are a lot of bubbles. People have created a lot of things thinking, oh yeah, this will go big. And in a bull market, you can do that because everybody is looking at just, like, market changes and not real
Right.
substance behind it. But now that, and that's what I really like about this market, is people are asking those important questions that, okay, I'm putting money into this, but is that really worth it? Can I
Right.
really utilize it? What's gonna actually increase it apart from, like, people bidding off each other? And
Sure.
those things, like, the things without substance wouldn't last, whether it's NFT art or anything else.
Right.
Um, but the project that has the substance, that has the long-term vision and why they exist, they will flow prosper regardless of anything.
Very, very well said. And when it comes to, the metaverse,
Yeah.
AR and VR, in your opinion, do you think it's inevitable that society, industries, are in some ways going to have some sort of interactive metaverse with an AR or, even a mixed reality experience, so to say? So whether
Yeah.
you're grocery shopping, perhaps even Amazon one day, it's probably going to
Yeah.
require you to use some sort of wearables, whether it's a
Yep.
visor or haptics and whatnot, and create an avatar and essentially go get your goods online.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's going
So
to happen in like
I
5 years, 20 years? Uh,
yeah, I have two hats on whenever I think about metaverse. One is my technical hat on, which is advocates the user experience, seamlessness, how you can actually do that. What is the barrier for me to enter and exit the metaverse, so on and so on, right?
right,
The other one is a visionary aspect, which is like, oh, this is so cool and it will happen eventually.
right,
But if I think about, like, mixed reality we have all been talking about well before meta, like the term
sure,
metaverse came into, like, popularity. So I remember that in 2000, and I think it was 10 or 11, where we presented a project, AR project, to Transport New South Wales, where we wanted, like, the direction to go and show the arrow.
right,
Because a lot of people, when you tell them turn left, they don't know which is left. So
sure,
those AR things now we saw in Google Maps and other applications as well, that they do it. So mixed reality is already here. And I think it's probably, like, at some point we might be accepting Google Glass as we rejected long ago, and say
right,
that is acceptable, like mixed reality is acceptable. So
sure,
when the accessibility to those technology and means become seamless, that's the point where this goes exponential. Until then, it will be experimental and incremental, and, like, some people might adapt. Early adapters are already adapting, and it will grow, but it will accelerate only when those experiences can meet them. Is my personal view as a technology user.
sure.
Like, if I have to put a VR glasses on or a goggles on to, like, get into that and so on, it's still, yes, I like it, but I wouldn't do it like as a mainstream.
Right. And as a sub question to what you said, and I've spoken with other developers about this as well. And since you have, I think, the benefit of having both a essentially developer, programmer's background and an entrepreneurial background, maybe you can shed some light on this. But why is it that wearables, MR, AR, VR, why are those accessories still very, very expensive? Because, to the best of my knowledge, I think virtual reality and everything else related has existed, in various forms for over 35 years, like probably at least since the early 80s. There was
Yeah.
very, very primitive VR,
Mhm.
I guess you could say
Yeah.
goggles, wearables for that. And now
Yeah.
we're in 2022. And if I was to just do a basic Google search, if I was to get an Oculus or an HTC or something like that, it's going to be like 300 and up as almost like the average.
Yes.
So it kind of makes me wonder why is this little space still very very expensive at this point despite the fact that
So
technology has gotten better.
let me tell you a story about like mobile. So when
Sure.
iPhone came back, I was the guy who got into mobile development back then, right?
Okay.
And we were talking about like 300 millisecond being the response time of any screen. So what that means is that if you touch a button and it does not respond to you within 300 millisecond, you will feel like there is something wrong with it.
That's a very good
That's how
point.
our mind works. All right.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And even today when I go and talk to my clients and I'm talking about, like, look, you cannot have sluggish screen, user will, like, realize it, and they were like,
Oh
no, no,
yeah.
no, it just, the network call only takes, like, so and so time. I'm like, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, right? Yeah.
You cannot, like, as a user, you would not like the products that are sluggish. You need to have UI response. You need to cater for scenarios when you go offline, because you are on mobile in the middle of city. You can go offline, trust me, I have seen it number of times.
Sure.
And people are still saying offline is a, like, in today's world everybody's online, so you don't need to cater for offline. I said, when you are in mobile, even a slightest delay, even not having a loading indicator, even simple
Right.
things can really make your mind like or dislike a particular product. And when you go to things like AR and VR, this becomes even more intense, because
Makes
everything
sense, yeah.
that we see, our mind is constantly trying to accept or reject that particular thing as a real versus virtual, and that barrier gonna stay there until we can, like, go to a quality that feels not only like a realistic, like pseudo real, but at least acceptable level, and we are not there yet. Because to get there, we think that, okay, the little delay is fine, in terms of number it looks fine, but when you actually experience it, it doesn't look right. We know that it doesn't look right, although it might be the best technology out there. So the price barrier is to the acceptable level. Like, anything below that will feel unacceptable. Like, your mind
Right.
will reject it. You will start getting headaches. All those things will start coming up. So
Right.
to keep that acceptable level, and it is getting cheaper. Like, if you think about time before, like 10 years or something, this was like not
Oh
even
yeah.
imaginable.
Right,
Today
yeah.
I can put my iPhone, I can put my Pixel into like a VR goggles, and I can still experience it in a reasonable way. And it is getting cheaper and cheaper eventually. So we are yet to hit that point where it almost feels like natural, but it's just a technology evolution.
Got it. And I can imagine if you're using a headset of some kind, those delays, those glitches must be so much more noticeable, and
Yes.
and almost impossible to ignore. Because I can imagine, like, if, hypothetically speaking, if I'm using an app on my phone and it kind of delays for 1 second, I may just put it back in my pocket for like
Yeah.
30 seconds and then like come back to it. I would imagine if you're wearing a headset, you're kind of locked in already. So you're not just going to take it off. You're like, no, when
Yeah.
is this thing going to happen, so to say. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so I guess the metaverse, one could say, is going to intensify both kind of good experiences, but also kind of some of those glitches and those errors and those mistakes and whatnot. They're going to be way more noticeable. So I would imagine if you're a company, you better come out with a very damn good project. If it's in the metaverse in particular, because people are really going to notice it.
Mm. Yeah, and on top of that, when you, like, it depends on the medium you are interacting with it. So when you are, like, on a button-based mobiles and stuff,
Right.
the acceptance level were different. When you went to touch, it became different. It became more strict, because now people are like, you see kids, and kids are doing like banging on the screen
Oh
because
yeah.
they think the thing is stuck, all right, or they didn't see any response and things. When you go into like speech, it even becomes like more more strict than that. And when you go to visual plus speech, it even gets like extreme. And
Right.
that means when you say something, you need to hear something back or get the response, or when you
Sure.
turn your head, it needs to move. It becomes more and more time critical as you go into more immersive experience, so to say.
Right, and that definitely makes sense as well.
Yep.
And as far as NFTs and gaming, one of the, I guess you could say, more recent developments or areas of success is play to earn. In particular, the Philippines and Vietnam and some in other
Yep.
regions of Southeast Asia, and also both, I guess you could say, Western and South Africa as well. People are essentially able to play games day in and day out and actually just earn cryptocurrency from that. I was wondering if you could talk about some of your thoughts as far as where that's going to go. Is it going to end up going to the United States, Australia, worldwide, or do you think it's going to be kind of more localized?
I mean, it is there in Australia and other countries as well. Like gaming has
Right.
always been a big industry. In fact, Australia has created some of the biggest games out there. It's actually very odd that we are small and we don't have connectivity to the rest of the world as good as the other countries. But then, when it comes to like graphics and all that, if you think in Hollywood as well, a lot of the VFX studios are based in Australia. So we have a
Oh,
very good
good to hear.
presence in that. Um, and gaming is going around, and play to earn and all these platforms are getting popularity. Maybe obviously with our population the numbers are gonna remain slow. I don't think that will change, but in general those platforms are targeted at an audience which is like, younger audience who has some time and who has passion for playing and all that. And I
Sure.
usually distinguish people from digitally native people and people who adopted digital world. So I would come in a like a category of digital adoption, because when I was born there was no computer, even phone was lucky thing. And I had my first computer when I actually went to computer engineering. So even though I use technology, I'm very passionate about it, I'm right into it. I still think from a digital adoption perspective. But I look at my daughters and they just take it for like, it's there.
Oh,
It's
sure.
there, and the way they interact with the technology is way different than what I do. And for those people, these platforms make complete sense. Like they get it. They are like, yeah, I would do it if I'm playing anyway and I can earn while playing, why not? Versus for me, I do not play, so I would not go and play just to earn. Does it make
Right.
sense? So there's a digital adoption category, and then there is digital native category. And often people, when they talk about these use cases, they misrepresent the use case by pointing them to the wrong audience.
Right.
They are not really directed at that audience. Like if I want to sell like 3D games and something, or mobile phones even, to my grandma, maybe there's not a use case. But when I put WhatsApp and video call, she loves it because she can see the grandchildren, she's happy about it and everything. So you need to point it to correct audience, and I think the audience is already there.
Very, yeah, very well said. And when it comes to cryptocurrencies and doing projects and the ins and outs of that, what is your opinion as far as mass adoptions? Like, do you think that's going to happen for, let's say, the government of Australia adopting in part or in whole one day, like some sort of digital currency? Either it's pegged to the into the Australian pound. Sorry, right?
Dollar, yeah,
Dollar,
that's
right?
right.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, didn't mean to mix it up. The Australian
Yeah.
dollar, or is it going to be something unique? I think there's a lot of mixed sentiment right now. I think especially with the volatility this year, as far as
There is.
cryptocurrency being adopted, you know, as a
Yeah.
whole, as like
Yeah.
a legal tender, in countries.
They are already trying that. In fact, most of the governments that I talk to, and the regulators and the advisors that work with those regulators, they are already trying to do how rather than if. So I think in last 2 years at least, the conversation has shifted from if to how. So
Right.
I don't think the if is is like any longer a question.
Yeah.
It's just how they will adapt and what would individual policies of different governments might be. And that's the only thing that I can see right now, and I can see that all those conversations are already happening. So it's just like, getting to see how different companies adapt that, in what way, and what is the application that they adapt. um, what it comes as a like a curious use case, and it has been talked about since the Bitcoin, is how the tenders between the countries, because the major use case for cryptocurrency is not the currency within the country. I think everybody believes in their country, and if I give you a dollar, you will have pretty much good faith that it will be like, recognized within the country. But when you
Sure.
go and take your currency outside your country, whether it will be recognized or not, I'm not talking about US dollar, but there are a lot of countries that has that problem, that whether their currency is
Sure.
recognized outside their country. And that's where I think the crypto has always had the sweet spot, saying this is where crypto can help, because if the currency is recognized by the governments, then you do not need to tie it to a particular government and wait for that. So you can have those cryptos and they are accessible everywhere.
Right. And backtracking a little bit, for those people out there, if they're looking to become developers in
Yep.
blockchain, as somebody who already has that skill set, what what would you recommend as a starting point as far as
Go out there and do it.
programming languages or
Yeah.
certifications and things like that?
Yeah, my advice is go out there and do it. That there's plenty of forums, Discord servers. There's so many communities that are like helping people, and
Right.
depends on what your background is. The answer might be a course versus going to, like, Discord server versus trying few YouTube videos and all that. Like in my interviews, every day I find new ways that people are using to learn these technologies and adapt them. But as long as you are comfortable with that, those learnings, you can go out and do it. And like, I'm always like, I always get reached out by people who are trying to get into the industry, and I
Right.
always pair them with my developers or someone I know who can help them out, and uh, put them in the right direction or anything like that. So again, I think it's a very active community, which is a very good thing, and people in general, they are very helpful to each other. I have seen some
Absolutely.
amazing use cases where someone just came and they were like, "Oh, I'm a like a web developer, and I'm trying to get into this. Can you help me out?" And they like ended up doing the projects together, or taking the course together, or becoming a mentor in a
Right.
in a paid and unpaid ways, different ways. So just reach out to people. All right. I'm always available on LinkedIn as well. If anybody wants to reach out for such like, guidance or anything, I'm always happy to point them in the right direction or help wherever I can. So just go out there and do it. That's my probably advice.
Awesome. And I guess, one of the more noticeable developments in the United States is the emerging new tech centers in the US now. So, in particular, Miami, Florida, Austin, Texas, in many
Yeah,
ways, it seems to be like those two areas are going to displace kind of New York and Palo Alto, so to say, as far as, the centers of Web3 in this country. So, with, kind of the momentum you and your team have at xenabler, are there any plans to come to the States?
we are. So I'm actually actively looking for someone who can be on the ground in Austin or Miami. So if anybody is listening or anybody is interested in working with us, please reach out. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm always available. So reach out if you are based in any of those stations and want to collaborate.
Awesome. Sounds good. And yeah, on an ending note, if what advice would you give to people who are looking to create their own blockchain companies? A lot of entrepreneurs, I think entrepreneurship in general has exploded upward
Yes.
since the beginning of the pandemic and going forward. I think people are more inclined to kind of do more risk taking and kind of pursue their dreams and ambitions. So for somebody who's already well deep into that journey, what advice would you give to aspiring, let's say, programmers, developers who are looking to, do what you're doing or do something
Yep.
similar?
So there's one advice that I have heard long time ago, and it goes in sales, entrepreneur, or like, whatever sense you want, is you cannot be delusional and successful at the same time. So If you
Well
want to
said.
be successful, like I meet a lot of people who have cool ideas and they didn't even bother and to go on Google and search if there's any company out there doing it. All right.
Very good point.
I would not say that just because someone did it, you shouldn't do it. No idea is unique. Trust me. In today's world, if you have a unique idea, maybe you haven't Googled it enough.
Right.
Um, but what I'm saying is that go find those ideas, go find those examples. They might be doing part of what you want to do. Learn from it, see what you need to change, what you can do better. Is there a value proposition? How you going to penetrate? Do your homework and then go after it. Go after your ideas and execution, because ideas are dollar a dime, executions are is where you need to focus. There's a $1 billion execution, no $1 billion ideas.
Wow, very well said. And I will have to say, I think a lot of people lose sight of that. I've run into many, many people who, and by the way, this is anecdotally speaking, tell me, I have $1 billion idea. I have $100 million idea. I hear that all the time. And actually, I'll have to say, um, more often than not, I'm not saying always, that tends to be a red flag in my mind. Because I think it's like if you've already done it, I don't think you're thinking in those terms, really.
I mean, if
Because you don't
I
know. You don't really know.
yeah, if I personally think that way, I'm pretty sure there are at least 500,000 companies out there doing the software development. So
But it's
if
that
I think
execution you're
my
talking about.
yeah, it's the
Yeah,
execution that can be unique and that can be valued, and you can't solve entire world anyway. So just focus
sure.
on what you do, how you do, go after it, and keep improving your processes and your product, and then let the world find about it.
Well said. I don't think I can add anything to that great explanation, actually. So, listen, Prashant, it was an absolute pleasure having you, coming back onto the show today and, discussing what X Enabler is up to and, some of the things you and your team are going to be working on, in the future. I remember you came on about like 8 or 9 months ago. We got into the weeds about some of the more programming nuances and so on. So, I'm very happy to see a lot of the progress and momentum, you and your team have, gained so far. So, like I said, it was an absolute pleasure having you coming back onto the show today and, getting into the weeds about, some of these issues
Yeah, no, thank you. It's always pleasure coming here.
for sure. Well, Prashant, thank you very much. I really do
Always.
appreciate it.
Thank you for
All
having
right,
me. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
for sure. Enjoy your day.